Most epitaphs are in the obvious place, the graveyard. But in the case of a forgotten war hero called David Russell, there is a memorial to him here, in the corridor of the Napier Public Hospital. Lance Corporal David Russell, 2nd New Zealand Expeditionary Force. Like so many other escaped prisoners of war, Lance Corporal Russell had obtained civilian clothes and was living with an Italian peasant. The Germans were evidently convinced that Lance Corporal Russell had been in contact with other ex-prisoners of war and partisans. He was chained to a wall and told that unless he gave the required information within 3 days, he would be shot. A civilian who took him food tried to persuade him to save his own life, but he replied, "Let them shoot me." Let them shoot me. Those brave words resound in my head. David Russell won the George Cross for his bravery. How could he do it? How could he remain silent as he was cruelly tortured, beaten, and in the end shot? This ward, where his epitaph now tells his tale, is where David Russell worked as an orderly before signing up and going off to fight in World War II. The hospital's centenary book. It includes a section on David Russell, but it points out that his award is not mentioned in the official Army histories. Seems extraordinary that David Russell was awarded the George Cross for bravery, but he wasn't included in the battalion history. I felt there had to be someone out there who knew this hero's story, even if the history books were silent. To find out more, I enlist the aid of the local paper. Could I speak to one of your reporters, please? Although a plaque in a hospital corridor is some recognition, I thought the act of bravery that earned him the George Cross deserved to be more widely known. When we think of Napier, we think of the earthquake of '31 and the architecture that rose from the rubble to make it New Zealand's Art Deco capital. We don't think of a man who died so others might live. However, a local newspaper with my article in it is just hitting the streets, and I'm about to get a call from someone who knew Dave all those years ago. It's over 50 years since he last saw Dave, but the newspaper article prompts him to contact me. He's an old mate of Dave's. He wants to remain anonymous, but he says he knew Dave well. He tells me Dave was born in Scotland. His mother died when he was 6, and 10 years later, he followed his brother to Australia. There, Dave spent 10 years on the swag and had a hard time of it. Then, he heard about the '31 earthquake in Napier and how there was plenty of work there. He saw an ad saying carpenters wanted, and on a whim, he came to New Zealand. Dave boarded here in Thackeray Street with the Vannon family. According to my caller, they had some good times together, but that's as much as my mystery man would say. However, it's a start. There's a note too. It's from Joy Colrick. Her brother Morris went to war with Dave and was also a good mate of his. I'm on my way. This looks promising. It turns out that Joy is a colour therapist, and people come to see her for her power to heal through the use of colour vibrations. David was about 10 years older than Maury, who had put his age up to 20 so he could get away.
I think he regarded him rather as a father figure, and he could rely on him completely for making a decision.
And what were your first impressions then of Dave?
I just thought he was a most ordinary sort of bloke. And I just remarked to Maury afterwards, I said, "Oh, he's a bit common, isn't he?" He said, "Don't be so silly, Joy." He said, "These blokes have got a heart of gold." He said, "They'd see you through thick and thin, even to the end."
From Joy, I start to get a glimpse of Dave's true nature. She tells me that Dave saved Murray's life while crossing Mount Olympus. Murray was crippled with violent stomach pains and collapsed at the side of the road.
And Dave said, "Come on, get up, you silly old goat, get cracking." And Murray said, "I can't, you go on, I'll catch you up." And he said, "Like bloomin' hell you will." And he actually piggybacked him some of the way with all his equipment over to the beach on the other side.
What would have happened if he'd left him behind?
Oh, he'd have been captured as prisoner of war if they didn't shoot him.
We're looking for anybody who may know of the late David Russell. Now, he lived in Hawke's Bay for a year before the war. We know that he worked as an orderly at the Napier Hospital in 1939.
I had a hunch that there was still someone else out there who could tell me more, and Ross Holden of News Talk was happy to help.
Do give me a call here. Would like to find friends and relations of the late David Russell.
Whether it was luck or meant to be, my hunch was about to pay off. Hello?
Oh, good morning. This is Mrs. Wilson of Napier speaking. I was David's girlfriend.
I could hardly believe it. David's girlfriend was still alive and living in Napier and would meet me straight away. This is the home of David Russell's girlfriend of nearly 60 years ago. Nancy Wilson has been happily married to Frank Wilson for over 50 years. However, she still remembers vividly her time with David. They met at a dance at the Foresters' Hall in Napier. She was impressed by David's handsome looks and his Scottish accent. David courted Nancy in the old-fashioned, unhurried manner, and they soon became very good friends.
Yes, he was lots of fun, treated me like a piece of Dresden china.
Happy-go-lucky.
Barrel of laughs,
Yeah.
yes, he was great to be with, really.
As Nancy remembers, I realise that apart from close family, she hasn't really talked to anyone about David since the war. But he was quite a confident sort of guy, was he?
Yes, he was.
He was,
And once he
right.
made up his mind to do something,
Right.
that was it, you know. No,
So-
he was a man of great loyalty.
When he went away, did he stay in contact?
Oh, yes, his letters just rolled in, you know. I don't know really how he found the time to do them, you know. Graphic descriptions of the countryside and, you know, where he and Murray had been into London. He loved nature, he loved walking.
When war was declared, Dave wasted no time answering the call.
Evil has put a stranglehold on decency.
He felt it was his duty. I agreed with him, really, but I didn't know that it was going to be for so long.
The call was for 6,000 to enlist. Dave signed up on the first day and his name appeared in the list of volunteers in the local paper.
But we are one and all a band of brothers.
I don't think any of us really knew the gravity of it, you know. No, we didn't. I certainly didn't.
As a parting gift before he left for war, Dave gave Nancy this watch. David Russell to Nancy Oliver.
He was strictly honest with me. He was a man of his word. He was a sympathetic man. He was so genuine. In the back of my mind, I knew, of course, there was a possibility he could have been wounded or shot. But I'm afraid I wasn't prepared for what happened.
A telegram arrived at Nancy's work, bringing the news of David's death.
I don't know what was running through me at that point. I knew I had to keep up for my own sanity. I knew that's what David would want me to do, because he was strong, and I actually was very strong. We finished the day's work and I went home.
Nancy wrote away for more information about David's death. She still has the letter she received back.
I have carried it around from that day. When I change my handbag, it goes in that one. It's rather dilapidated, but it's just a treasure. I wanted to know what happened. You see, they say, okay, killed in action. But it wasn't till I got this letter that it gave me an insight.
The letter revealed Dave had been captured, held for 3 days, and then executed as a spy. It described him as a hero. This is all that Nancy has been told.
But I still don't know the true picture.
How long did it take you to come to terms with the grief?
I've never done that. I'm being honest.
You never have. Having seen how much Dave had meant to Nancy, I wanted to know more than ever, for her sake as well as my own, what exactly happened to Dave in those last days. Nancy put me onto Alf Harbottle, who had met Dave just after the famous 22nd Battalion bayonet charge at Crete. Surviving that made Dave feel invincible.
Dave was right in there, and there were shot both sides of him, and he seemed to think, well, if he got that far, he wasn't going to be shot.
It was that incident which led Dave Russell to believe he had a charmed life. But it was a belief that was unfounded, because it wasn't long before Dave and Alf and the rest of their battalion were taken prisoner. Alf has many fond memories of Dave, but at the Benghazi prison camp he saw Dave for the last time. A frustrated Dave was kept in a series of prisoner of war camps, and eventually he was shipped to northern Italy to Camp PG-57. It was here, in the prison camp, that Dave wrote to Nancy, telling her to buy an engagement ring.
Well, I thought, how much longer? He can't be much longer. And I thought I'd wait to let him do that himself. Yes, to think he was so near and yet so far.
Nancy's desire to know more about his last moments was still nagging at me. I decide to go through the army files again to see if there is some clue that I've missed. My attention is caught by an article which mentions Arch Scot's name repeatedly. I track him down to discover Arch and Dave both escaped from their prisoner of war camps in Italy, and that Arch wrote a book about it called Dark Side of the Moon. Arch played a key role in a mass escape that saw 47 prisoners of war smuggled out of Italy under the noses of the occupying Germans. I start to get some idea of what it must have been like being on the run, always on the alert.
Summer would bring its profusion of foliage and sense of security. In autumn, you seem to be living in a world of suspended animation, like the great calm that precedes a storm, when you waited and watched the first leaf fall. You watched it right to the ground, and though it fell lightly, it pounded on your heart and on your mind like a sledgehammer. Winter is coming. Winter, winter. What an unwanted bastard of a season for the hunted.
Tell me what sort of person Dave was.
If I was in a tight spot and I wanted a cobber, I wouldn't ask for anyone better. If you got in a social situation with him, you might have to watch, because he liked wine. When he had too much, perhaps, then it took over a bit more than it might have for some others.
Arch suggests I contact Lucia Antonell, the granddaughter of the Italian man who harboured him from the Germans. Arch believes Beppy, a young Italian mate of Dave's, is still alive and Lucia might be able to find him. She does, and she sends me a taped interview with Beppy. Hopefully, here are the missing pieces of the puzzle. The mass escape from Italy was being planned when Dave was captured and brought to a cell something like this one. Arch says that Dave would have had numerous contact names and addresses in his head. It's from Lucia's interview with Beppy that we now know what happened to Dave in those last few days. It turns out that Beppy, who was about 20 at the time, kept a close eye on Dave, often helping him out of tight spots. He says one Sunday evening, Dave had gone to a local bar frequented by German soldiers.
The incident still gives me the shudders. A friend of mine, Luigi, came to tell me that Dave was having a row with a couple of Germans. One of them was an SS soldier, and what was worse, Dave had started speaking in English. I grabbed my bicycle, went to the osteria and tried to speak with Dave, but he wouldn't listen. When I realized things were going badly for him, I punched him on the jaw. I dragged him away, but not before the Germans had started to shoot and shout. With a lot of difficulty, I got him home and into the underground shelter. I told him not to leave until the day after, when I would come and get him. But as usual, Dave never did what he was told. Dave became very restless and he broke a cover to go and stay with his friend Vittorello.
Giving in to that restlessness turned out to be a fatal mistake for the young soldier. It was near his friend's house that Dave was captured by the Germans. Dave was taken to the German headquarters in the village of Ponte di Piave. Beppe followed him to find out as much as he could.
I spoke to a guard who was in charge of the village called Carrier. Carrier told me that David was inside the villa where they were torturing him and that they would shoot him. I was worried for us both. If Dave had spoken, all the people involved in helping Allied POWs would have been arrested and their villages burned down.
Because he was captured out of uniform, he was treated as a spy. He was told at the outset that if he didn't tell the Germans everything he knew, within 3 days, he would be shot. Nobody knows the painful details of the tortures that Dave faced, but it is known from the locals that his torturer, a man called Giuseppe Adria, had his own special methods. Dave was kept for 3 days without food or water, and he was beaten and tortured. The Germans wanted the names of the other escaped prisoners and the Italians who were hiding them. When the Italian villa custodian expressed concern that the Germans would shoot him, Dave replied, "Let them shoot me." Early in the morning on February the 28th, David Russell's interrogators tried one last time to get him to talk, but he wouldn't. He said, "I will not tell you my job or where my companions are." So they took him outside into the beautiful grounds of the villa and asked him to stand up against the stone wall. Without being seen, his good friend Beppe had managed to secure a vantage point beyond the walls of the villa. But all he could see was the backs of the firing squad. Dave asked for a cigarette. He smoked some of it, and they asked him again, did he have anything to say? He shook his head. He threw away his partly smoked cigarette, and he stood rigidly to attention. Beppe heard the shots. The German warrant officer, who was the official witness at the execution, later said, "The prisoner died bravely." They left him where he fell until about 6 o'clock that evening. Then they bundled the body into a ground sheet and took it to the local cemetery. The villagers erected a headstone to commemorate his courage and his unshakable loyalty. Later, his body was exhumed and moved to an official war cemetery. A week after David Russell died, the first stage of Arch Scot's escape plan materialized. David Russell's silence had saved the lives of 47 servicemen. Back in New Zealand, Nancy sank into a deep depression and a long period of grief.
The hardest part has been that he was tortured. I don't know what the torture was. He was left without food or water. No one to speak with. No one to share his grief with. And he's just been shot.
She'd kept all Dave's letters in a pillowcase and would read them over and over. But 5 years later, just before she married Frank, Dave's photos and letters would be lost forever.
One morning my mother was burning some rubbish and she said to me, "You don't want these anymore, do you?" And I said, "No." Why I said no, I don't know. Because they went up in flames, the whole lot of them, and I lost all the records.
I returned to show Nancy everything we'd found out, Beppe's story, details of the execution, and also a video from Lucia showing the people of Ponte di Piave holding a memorial service to mark the 50th anniversary of David Russell's death.
We are here today to commemorate
somebody who came from far away and put his life as a fighter for freedom, democracy for all the people.
And Italy is one place Nancy has always wanted to visit.
I think it would help me considerably to meet someone who was with him those last few hours. But there's still some unfinished business there.
What would it take to bring it all to a conclusion, do you think?
I want to stand on the very spot where he went down.
David Russell was without question a brave man, unafraid of taking risks. Some might say he was too confident, taking one risk too many. And although he's hardly been remembered in New Zealand, to those who depended on him, his friends and the Italians whose lives he saved by his silence, David Russell will never be forgotten.